Yeah, recognition of prior earning. All right, that's hopefully the theme of today's video. Look, over the course of the next 30 minutes, I'm going to talk about two themes. And one of them is going to be a creative theme on the basis of what if you had ultimate power? What if you were a unified society? And take that dreamer aspect and run with it a bit. Part of that comes from the stemation of a foundational point, which is recognition of prior earning. And that's the nature of these videos, is we digest little bits of the picture. Mostly because if I said an overarching spiel in one go, and this is what people don't understand about why I don't just say it out loud, is because we see things in the current paradigm, we won't see the model as working. And if we don't explain some of the underlying steps, industry will instantly have fear, because it'll go, well, that model doesn't factor me, and that model works, so therefore what happens to me? And so it's really important that we acknowledge that this total overview, this total review, if you will, this total change up to the way that the world operates, whilst it affects a significant amount of the population initially, over time it essentially could impact everybody. And then the measure of your involvement is the measure of your reward. You know, if we go all in, if all the altruists, if all of the big dollar people who have turned altruistic all recognise that they want to live on a world of peace, it doesn't matter how much money they've got if they can't be happy. That if we all invested in a happier future for all. Sorry, I've got a feedback screen now. I'm new to this device, and just between you and me, it has let me down this morning. I took an impromptu video because there was a cat on my lap, and I thought, oh, I'll give this recording just because I'm sitting in front of the camera. And I'd already done a video for Patreon, and that video fell short. The first one fell short because of battery power, and so I put the camera on charge, and after charging it, getting the video uploaded and things, I put the camera on and I have a cat on my lap. I thought, well, I'll do another recording, and having better infrastructure in place, I've got a tablet just off to the side, be it a consumption device, an iPad in this instance, and it's got a big old timer on it, so I can keep track roughly of when my timeline is going to run out. And then sometime this morning I tried to hack this camera, but the powers that be, the web pages, seem to be missing serving those files anymore, for probably legitimate reasons. So look, I've been caught with different infrastructure, and I've got these really interesting little green things that keep lighting up at the top there, giving me updates. But no, everything is recording. Okay, so yeah, I just never use this camera realistically, and it just caught me out twice already this morning. I don't want to go for three times. It's not a charm. So recognition of prior earning, and then talking about something that's the creative take out on what happens if, as a group, we all get together and just go all in. Okay, so what is recognition of prior earning? Okay, you might pick up my tone of voice associated with that. Students that turn up at university, if they've got a skill set that they've earned prior to turning up there, a lot of education bodies have a little status that they can apply called recognition of prior learning. And it's basically to acknowledge, okay, you've done that before and that's valuable, and so we'll acknowledge that and we'll let you take that with you going forward. That might save you some more time in this degree. Recognition of prior earning, right? This is something that if all the big dogs went, yeah, we've got world peace in our hands, and he had bucket loads of money, right? So the ideal situation, right? So my discussions this morning have already covered the difference between your creative CEO and your intellectual CEO, and we don't want we do need them to have both skill sets, because certainly in business, you've got to be competitive, you've got to be reactive, and you've got to come up with ways that are a bit different sometimes to own a market. So look, let me be creative, and I'll tell you why this is actually so late to the table in terms of mentioning it, is that I live in a mindset that this vision is doable. I've had that in my head for a very long time, but the problem is, I guess I take so much of it for granted that I've already got one foot in the new paradigm, and then it's hard to see the world in any other light. And it's like if you take a person who's ignorant completely to what a cube is, and you have somebody describe with words how to draw it on a piece of paper, and you're starting off with, you're going to wonder, do they know what a square is? And then you get them to draw, and you might get them to say, okay, well, start with your pencil here, and then all of a sudden you're using all the new areas of your brain trying to go, well, hang on, Yeah, okay, how do you get someone to draw a square without them knowing what a square is, and then having to give them verbal instructions for how to move a pencil across a page? And when somebody's completely foreign to these concepts, it becomes, where's the kicking off point? Where do I start? And so the flip side to that, and this is what I was saying, is that a lot of these things I almost take for granted, and so I operate on a basis that, okay, well, if they were working, if they were that way. And it's not to say that I haven't thought about the infrastructure rollout. I have. That was the important part that I really had to get down pat in the early 5 years. It's like, does it work? Does it work? Does it work? And I tested against every model and tested it, and I watched the news and watched how industry worked and recognised what worked in industry. And I thought, you know what? It never seems to be fallible. It always seems to be like the best options and what everybody's pushing for. And like theoretically, because governments are too big and private bodies have to be regulated, and it takes time for laws to change, and nobody can sort of make it happen. And you see in the private enterprise the limitations that are put on them. But recognition of prior owning, how could we use that statement, or if it was meaningful, how could we, I guess, arguably pay people for things that they've already earned and make it in a way that changes the world? So recognition of prior earning, in my eyes, is this concept. And I don't know if this is even rolloutable. It just depends on the scale of our production, if you will. Are we big enough? Do we have enough influence? Do we have enough power? And so this would be under the line of, essentially in this guy's, and I've never daydreamed of getting a Nobel Peace Prize, but I would theoretically somewhere along the line have to have gotten one if any of this was to actually play out. So I don't want one, and arguably it's the opposite. I've been sitting on this for so long, I should be crucified by the people for not having made this happen sooner. But I do feel that it's the appropriate time, and at any sooner time in history, we might not have all been motivated to join hands and so proactively jump together, at the same time. And I can't imagine what would happen if every human being on the planet all jumped off the ground at the exact same moment, up and jumped to the same height and then fell and then all hit the earth at the same time. That sort of it'd be a big drum, and the beat, oh my lord, the beat in the street. Let's make it happen with our feet. So recognition of prior earning is this concept that if we had bucket loads of money, okay, so of all my videos, this is the one that probably isn't a given. If we had bucket loads of money, we had ultimate power, okay, and we could go out and we could buy the research as done by every business. So imagine right now we got, say, and I'll just throw some numbers out there. This is in no way, any relation to real world events or people is in no way intended. All opinions are my own, and certainly not that of the platform provider or anyone else. Maybe the person who passed this to you. Good on them for passing on information they might not even believe in. It's a pretty good friend you got. I trust their ability to take on board information and have reviewed all the sources available, because clearly they've got an open mindset and they're not so confronted in life as to feel that they need to limit other people from having said mindset or a wider viewpoint, in case you could argue with them and go against their belief system. Sorry, there's an author in me always. I love to always play out the concepts of the different personalities in a role. So if we had unlimited money and ultimate power, arguably, power not force, and we could walk out there and we could buy from everybody their prior learning. So there's 10 pharmaceutical companies, just to make up any random number, and they've all been working on the solution to a particular problem, and the particular problem is harder because it's got more gates or something about it. It's the hardest bit of research we've ever had to do, and by timeline everyone's going, that'll take 10 years. And in a private enterprise world where everybody's got to keep their research to themselves, you're limited by the talent pool that you've got at your disposal, and those finite resources can only get you so far. So each of them might get one aspect of the key, and it's highly costly to them to get that little bit of development. And in order to be profitable, they might need all of the aspects of the key. And or you can just take shortcuts and use something that'll just naturally rip through it easily, and we really probably don't want in our bodies at all. And then not run it in clinical trials long enough for anybody to really know about it. So it's an urgent situation, and you want everybody to work together. Recognition of prior earning would actually allow businesses to be paid for the research and development they've already done, and to acknowledge the future potential worth in the market. Now, obviously, these things need to play out over time, and in a situation where it's not well regulated, you could come up with in a negative mindset, you come up with a situation where they could manipulate that. Down the track, they could create this to happen, and then there need to be more acknowledged for the contribution that they would have had in that scenario. So let's just put that stuff out of our periphery for a second, because the scope of a 30-minute video is just not long enough for me to actually give you some insights for ways that we can possibly do these things. But look, working off a very simple premise, what if we could pool all knowledge, right? So we're really held back in this commercial world where we don't have the ability of the other science teams. We don't have, if they get a great breakthrough and it's essential for everybody, but they can't share it because, and at the end of the day, non-disclosure agreements, or while earning a wage for such and such, an individual isn't going to want to have their pants sued off them by a big corporation because they did the altruistic thing and then shared scientific data with a wider audience. All these things are deeply wrong, and integrity. We can't have employees backstabbing their employers, because arguably there's a family there, and that employer took a chance on said peon and put them in a position of power to get to play with their tools in laboratory or whatever and make breakthroughs, and so we associate that everything belongs to said bodies, and I'm not just talking here vaccines or anything like that. It could be technology, and so somebody might have part of the solution to the puzzle and somebody else might not. And we mostly get around the technology stuff on the basis that in the free market, if you have a battery breakthrough, you don't own all the industries of things that make use of batteries. So everybody gets to make use of the technology. And so we can argue this both ways. Like, I know what he's saying is a fallacy. But look, maybe in my head I'm just applying it to a loose structure. And again, my observation is that whatever I focus on, I covered this in the last video that didn't work out, as a B video now, because it didn't work out, it'll wind up on the paid for Patreon channel. I give other stuff on the Patreon channel for free, but I put stuff behind a paywall if it's either embarrassing or personal. I guess I want people a bit more sympathetic or empathetic to me. If you've committed money, then you're probably more interested and probably more patient with me. So you might get my B grade clips. You're paying money for my worst stuff, eh? Great advertisement there. So recognition of prior earning is the basis for the next thing, which is, and again, this comes from having enough money to literally pay out and offer the businesses recognition of future credits and all sorts of things that actually allow them to have the worth that they're worth, so that nobody's hesitant towards the idea of sharing all the profundities, breakthroughs in science and all their technology, if you will, because the ways we could lower. Look, I don't even have to begin for anyone here who doesn't have a mindset of what that could actually then ultimately mean. The ramifications of when you pull all your science together. Better breakthroughs, cheaper production, more environmentally friendly, more longer lasting. Just everything just starts to get better because we can't even fathom how much great breakthroughs in science has either been swept under the rug because it's not patentable, or it's that the competition needs to exist, and so things need to be hidden because it's mine only. So we need to move away from that concept of the seagulls in the Finding Nemo movie, all saying mine. They were the most antisocial characters in that movie, and that movie worked. It told kids not to be that way, right? If a 2-year-old child or a 3-year-old child could be influenced by said concepts, that I don't think it would be hard for me to convince even people who are CEOs of said companies sitting on lots of patents that there's probably not a lot of convincing needed that the right path, what we should be doing. Look, imagine if you could be profitable for that, and imagine if you could be well remunerated. And arguably, two things happen straight away is that accountability can be increased. And so this runs in parallel to the system that if you know that you've done something wrong, at the moment, we see it all the time, is that the punishment when governments regulate markets, when governments come in and they do the fines, or the regulating bodies do the fines for the people that have done something unethical, the fines seldom match what commercial benefit they got by doing said wrong. And that, if you learn that way, then you kind of get away with it, and then you do it again. And I'll give two fantastic examples: Cyberpunk and Microsoft. Okay, so Microsoft learned with their really anti-competitive practices of trying to sew a web browser as your file browser, and then trying to say to everybody, oh no, it's essential to the operating system. It wasn't to exit our number one competitor who outsold us from the market, Netscape Navigator. Internet Explorer is so essential to the operating system, and so they argued it in the courts. And the magistrate was good enough to say, look, problem is with being, wasn't a magistrate, sorry, what was it, the regulators in America, the real top of the lines. Oh man, I'm having a mental break, so I don't really want to talk about politics or legality systems. But they basically, their final judgment was like, look, the truth is, we don't really have a tech background, and both your legal teams argue so well. At the end of the day, how do we know? The problem is when you hand it over a fine that's paltry versus what market growth you got, the competition that you stimulate, then it's gone. And another example I'll give just before I go to cyberpunk was a sound card technology that existed in the late 90s. It was based off technology used for military helicopter simulations, and it was fantastic. It was the most evolved thing we've ever had in a sound chip, and what it could do was just fantastic. But the competitors sued them wrongfully, and eventually it turned around. And the problem was they'd gone bankrupt in the time of trying to fight this legal case, at which point the competitors just came and just bought them out and then owned said patent so that they could do whatever they want with it, and they actually buried it because that's what you do. So you don't have to refine your product anymore. You can just keep selling the inferior part. Now you've got no competition. And I can't even fathom how many times in society this has probably happened. I'm just a consumer, so I'd be blissfully unaware of the amount of times it's happened, because obviously the people who work these ways do everything they can to cover it up or change the way that we see things. But look, Cyberpunk was another example where they launched a game in that critical prior to Christmas stage, which is the best retail season to release a game in. So people can put it in stockings for Christmas time. If there's a large big part of the world that are into Christmas and giving gifts, that's the market sees. I think there's another one in March is one of the leading, and it might be to do with holidays and stuff. But there's key seasons when you want to release your game. So they released this game that wasn't ready for market, and ultimately it hurt them, sure, but the amount that it hurt them wasn't as much as the amount that they profited by it. And so we reward people with less than ideal behaviour, and they've been paid for it, and their job is to get paid for it. Well, they're going to do it again, whether they'll consciously do it again or not, But the worst thing is they're a lighthouse beacon for everyone else to say, hey, I got away with it, and the fines aren't really that big, and deal with it, And so there's probably money corrupts in that regard, in all sorts of systems. So the concept that I wanted to bring up, that we need to have this concept that maybe, what if you could unify the world in such a way that enterprises were willing to give up their technology or not be trying to push for a scientific breakthrough. Because when you're in a competitive market, you've just got to beat your competitors to market. And when you're playing with super colliders and all sorts of stuff, creating black holes on the planet, and there was one that they'd been doing it on a research site for a while. I shouldn't give this example because I'm opinionated. I'm not trying to point a finger at anyone, even though I've just pointed out two companies in particular that have given a perfect example to we the consumers to say, oh, there's that. But I mean, by no means they're probably not the worst cases in history. Personally, I think some of the science ones are the worst things in history because of the potential ramifications ultimately to everybody. So this is the heading for the other thing which I was going to say is not on my planet, or not on our planet. I think it's more unified. Not on our planet. But if I say that, our assumes everybody, and maybe not everybody feels that way. So I'm going to say not on my planet, okay, because it's less valuable as a statement. Not on my planet. What's he saying when he's saying not on my planet? Okay, well, don't fucking build black holes on my planet. I don't care if it gives you an energy breakthrough or something that might make your company more money. Right? When you put at risk every other single person based on you getting the math right for how to contain something that you don't understand. So I've given an example there, so I don't have to go into medicine. Look, who knows? At the end of the day, we as the general public shouldn't have to have on our radars this notion that we don't have power over these big organisations. We shouldn't have to have on our radar the fears of what we need to possibly change when we don't have any set ability to do so. That creates such a background level of stress to a human brain. If you know there's something that absolutely needs to be done, but you also don't have the power to do anything about it, you just push it out of the periphery of your mind and generally never think about it ever again, because it's just too horrific a thought. It's just too horrible, and you don't want to think about it, because we're doing everything for our kinship, for our descendants. So really we should be working on the premise of we're just borrowing the planet from our descendants. We're going to get to rent our time on this earth, and we kind of want to leave it as good as we find it. And anyone who's gone camping or gone to a music festival, the principle is you leave it just as clean as you find it. You take your rubbish with you, or they understand that principle, and they understand when you turn up at a site and there's bits of detritus all around. It's not as pristine and as immaculate as it could be, and you might have saved all year for that holiday or taken your family a long distance to go there, and you get there, and because somebody else can't be bothered to pull their weight, your time is sullied. And so the concept of not on my planet is that if we can buy the patents, if we can remunerate all these companies and put all the research and whatnot in, this motivation to beat competitors to market drops right off. If we're working as a unified team and we don't need to march ourselves off a cliff in order for one or two to profit a little bit more than somebody else, we're better off for it as a group. And so you look at the successful systems in nature, the hive mind mentality, if you will, ants or bees or these various things, they work so well because of the ultimate disciplinary that's involved. This is a very political thing to say, but I'm passionate about China, okay? And everyone's got a take on China, and that's probably a loaded word, and I don't know, I try not to pay attention to the news. But I really think the people there should be commended, because for all the time in history that there's been that aspect of social engineering where they're limited to one child or whatever, that really jumps them ahead in some ways, certainly in my eyes, because of what that then means. What they've given up in the short term, because they're motivated over the long term, is exceptional. So on the basis of recognition of prior learning, if you look at the Chinese medicine system, refined over thousands and thousands of years, and this was week one introduction to me when I turned up in a medical type course, was they said, they were talking about the cyclical nature of the universe, and it was like, going back to the time when we didn't really have much education or medicine, and it was, here, eat this root, wormwood might make you shit out the worms or something, something appropriately named. But we learn basic things in life, and you're like, eating that does this to you and whatnot. We learn it over time, and we hand hopefully these recipes, these tools down to our descendants. And when you refine something like the Chinese medicine system, from genius application and repetition of application and refinement over such a large amount of time, it's a very, very, very valuable system. And sorry, I've sidetracked there. The loop being is that whilst we've had all these evolutions in medicine and whatnot, the vogue nature of coming back around, as was happening in the late 90s, was people getting back into herbs and stuff as a way to heal. And so we'd come full circle, even though we'd had all these scientific breakthroughs, we had all these options that were presented to us in a science world. It was kind of amusing to some. It's like we're back to, here, eat this root, So recognition of prior learning, when you take the geniuses or the sacrifices of such a large organisation, you start to country, and you start to factor the worth of that to the planet in the present day and at the stage in history or the epoch that we're in. There is value, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to. There's ways to remunerate that, or there's ways to incorporate the value that's associated to that when we go forward. And if businesses could be reassured, and this comes back to the accountability thing I was saying, if businesses could be reassured that they can put their hand up when they stuff up as quickly as possible, because a stitch in time saves nine. The sooner we deal with something, the sooner we can get our momentum back up again and moving forward, then the better. And what's worse in medicine is quite often when we get to this litigious system where sometimes it's better to leave something is broken in market, because the amount of money you'll make is more than the repercussions you'll eventually suffer. And more so, we've seen that in medicine. We've seen that all the profits are disappeared by the time that the lawsuits come through, going, this has been really bad for everybody, everybody's highly addicted to this or whatever, and like now it's like, no, the board's already got their money, they've pissed off, and you can't touch them. That's personal wealth they had before this, and the legal system's propped up, or the laws have been passed that money's untouchable. And so it's beneficial to sweep stuff under the rug for as long as you can possibly get away with it. Rotate your board of directors and have somebody else get the blame or whatever. So we can't have these short memories. We've got to have the ability to work on a greater timeline, and we've got to be motivated as a whole, to be integrated as a whole. Now, again, a lot of what I've said is fantasy in the regards that it's limited by how much power we have as a group. And this is where I get back to, if the world was to mobilise towards world peace overnight, and it could happen overnight, so long as we had faith that there was a model in place that wasn't going to leave us short, because the rollout doesn't happen overnight. That's the problem, is that the concept can happen overnight, the will to implement can happen overnight, but if it takes 7 days to implement, and on day 2 you're not feeling it, then we've also got to have that getting it to market quickly, if you will, and changing things in such a way. And so there's ways to do that. And I've got some ideas, and they're pretty sound. But I really need to chat with heads of industry, and I really need to chat with key players, if you will, and get things up to speed. Now, I can't afford a $70,000 dinner table seat. I don't. I'm not in that position right yet, but maybe I never will be. And look, historically, I guess these videos, I make them on the basis that there might be profound moments in them. There might be the nature of needing this information to be digested a little bit over time, and some of these concepts to be fleshed out a little bit. Means like if I was to give my big overarching spiel, knowing that there's all these little compartmental aspects that hold up certain parts of the vision, if those parts haven't been given any foundation, then people are going to naturally want to interrupt me each step of the way when giving said spiel. Going, oh no, but what about, the racists aren't going to want to hang out in the same suburb as the, and you've got to have ways to, that your society isn't going to work as idealistically as you want. And I can give you absolute methods for how everything can come together. But you need to have the patience to digest, if you will, little bits at a time. And it might not be you personally, but it might be your neighbours next to you don't have the same background that you've got, the same education that you've got to understand certain aspects of what I'm saying. And look, even though I hooked a charger up to fire this camera up so it wouldn't happen 3 times, it's not powering the camera up. It's sort of saying it is, but it isn't really. I'm going to trust that I'm basically out of time. So I'll do my goodbye now, so if it cuts out, at least this video has been worthwhile. Now, look, I don't do the standard YouTube channel stuff, and this is continuing what I was just saying, but the professionalism here isn't 100%. I quite often do what a lot of tubers would do at the end of the video, saying, hit these buttons and do that, and if you like this, do this, and do this, or whatever. And I kind of put that at the start of the video, and it's because I treat you as a friend, and it's a conversation. And I guess I'm sort of trying to do that in a way as to reframe your mindset that even though the media is given to you in the same method, that the value of this message is not the same worth. That you couldn't just weigh them up the same. I'm trying to differentiate myself, if you will. And I think you'll find that with my original videos being a one-to-one framing. There was a reason behind that. And I had to choose the worst lens on the camera. I knew everything could have been better, but I am being very subtle here. There is a driving guidance behind me to get this right. And look, again, it's at each stage of the way. I suppose at this stage I'm a nothing, and I'm presenting nothing, arguably, and I'm presenting nothing to no one. And I'm doing a really good job of it. And at later stages in the game, I might be shaven head, collared up, and talking to members of industry and acting exceptionally differently. But the reason why I'm so candid and so honest and open on these tapes is that I don't want people to think that I've changed. I need people to see how I operate, and it is the notion of integrity, it is the notion of accountability, and there's a lot of aspects that we need in our role models, we need in our governing bodies, if you will. And I think people need the confidence and the trust to realise that the people that they put up, if I was a statesman, for example, if I've been elected to a position of power or to represent people, that I've got the periphery to see their needs. And so if I do that and I present myself well, it saves the need for lots of people to tell me their needs. If they can see that he's preemptively figured that out, then that can be quite handy. And I guess it's the word preempt is it. I'm trying to preempt the need to avoid large amounts of discussion by having small amounts of discussion appropriately planted and watered and nurtured and as foundation. So at the same rate, I really want this to take off as quickly as possible. And to that effect, I'm maniacal, if you will. These videos are consistent, and that's not to say that the quality of the material is